Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Vincent Crawford had built his life like he built his custom homes, with precision, patience, and an unforgiving eye for structural integrity. At 42, he owned Crawford Construction, the most respected building company in Millbrook County. His calloused hands could frame a house or close a $1 million deal with equal expertise. But it was his mind that made him truly dangerous, methodical, calculating, and utterly without mercy when crossed. His marriage to Rebecca had been his greatest project. 15 years of careful construction, from their college romance at State University to the sprawling colonial they called home. She'd been studying education while he earned his business degree, both dreaming of the American ideal. Vince had provided it all. The house with the white picket fence, the successful business, their son Dylan, who was now 16 and showed promise as a linebacker. Rebecca taught third grade at Millbrook Elementary, beloved by parents and students alike. She volunteered at the local animal shelter, organized charity drives, and baked cookies for school fundraisers. To the outside world, they were the perfect family. Vince had believed it too, until 3 months ago when a random glance at Rebecca's phone shattered 15 years of trust. The text was simple: "Can't wait to feel you inside me again. Tyler." Vincent Crawford was not a man who broke. He was a man who demolished others with surgical precision. Tyler Hoffman was Rebecca's yoga instructor, 12 years younger, with the kind of lean physique that came from teaching hot yoga 5 days a week. Vince had met him twice at Rebecca's studio events. A soft-spoken man with doe eyes and an easy smile. The kind of man who probably cried during romantic comedies and wrote poetry about chakras. That night, while Rebecca slept beside him, Vince lay awake staring at the ceiling. His marriage was over. That much was certain. But divorce was for ordinary men who let emotions cloud their judgment. Vincent Crawford was extraordinary, and extraordinary men demanded extraordinary retribution. By morning, he had the skeleton of a plan. Chapter 2. Reconnaissance. Vince approached his wife's destruction like any construction project: thorough planning, quality materials, and expert execution. Over the next 2 weeks, he became a student of his wife's affair while maintaining the facade of the devoted husband. Rebecca had grown careless in her confidence. She deleted texts but left her laptop logged into cloud storage. Her schedule claimed yoga classes 3 times a week, but Vince's discreet surveillance revealed she was meeting Tyler at his apartment above the studio for 2-hour sessions that had nothing to do with downward-facing dog. Tyler lived alone, drove a beat-up Honda Civic, and struggled to pay his rent teaching yoga and working part-time at an organic juice bar. His social media revealed a history of relationships with married women. Apparently, Rebecca wasn't his first student to receive private instruction. But Vince's real discovery came when he followed Tyler to a meeting with Rebecca at a coffee shop downtown. Hidden behind a newspaper, he watched them hold hands across the table like teenagers, Rebecca's wedding ring noticeably absent from her finger. "I hate lying to Dylan," Rebecca whispered, her voice carrying in the quiet cafe. "He keeps asking why I'm gone so much." "Baby, after the divorce, we could be a real family," Tyler replied, squeezing her hand. "Your kid will adjust. Kids always do. Your kid." The casual dismissal of his son ignited something cold and lethal in Vince's chest. These people had plotted not just to destroy his marriage, but to dismantle his family, to make his son collateral damage in their selfish fantasy. That evening, Vince sat at his kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, designing the blueprint for their destruction. Unlike his houses, this construction would leave nothing standing. Dylan walked into the kitchen, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "Dad, you okay? You've been quiet lately." Vince looked at his son, Rebecca's eyes, but his own stubborn jawline, the product of their union, now caught in the crossfire of her betrayal. "Just work stuff, son. Nothing you need to worry about." But Dylan was perceptive, like his father. "Are you and Mom having problems?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Vince could have lied, could have protected his son's innocence a little longer. Instead, he chose to prepare him for the war to come. "Dylan, sit down." There are some things about your mother you need to know. Chapter 3. The First Strike. Vincent's initial move was subtle but devastating. Rebecca prided herself on being irreplaceable at Millbrook Elementary, but Vince knew that small-town school districts lived and died by their reputations. A whisper in the right ear could topple kingdoms. He started with Margaret Winters, the school board president whose husband had hired Crawford Construction to build their dream retirement home. Over coffee and blueprints, Vince casually mentioned seeing Rebecca's car at unusual locations during school hours. "I'm sure it's nothing," he said with practiced concern, "but as a taxpayer, I'd hate to think our teachers weren't fully committed to their students." Margaret's eyebrows rose with interest. She was a woman who collected gossip like some people collected stamps. Within a week, Rebecca faced her first administrative review in 10 years of teaching. Suddenly, her every move was scrutinized. Her afternoon dental appointments and personal days were questioned. The pressure mounted until she was forced to end her afternoon meetings with Tyler, relegating their affair to stolen moments after school. But Vince's masterstroke came through his connections in the local business community. Tyler's yoga studio rented space in a building owned by Frank Morrison, whose construction projects had made Crawford Construction very wealthy over the years. A quiet conversation about concerns regarding the moral character of certain tenants led to Tyler receiving a 30-day notice to vacate. When Rebecca came home that evening, red-eyed and stressed, Vince played the concerned husband perfectly. "Bad day, honey?" He poured her a glass of wine, the same vintage they'd shared on their anniversary. "Just work drama," she lied, accepting the glass gratefully. "Sometimes I think people in this town have nothing better to do than create problems." "Small towns," Vince agreed sympathetically. "Everyone's business becomes everyone else's entertainment." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text. Vince watched her face crumple as she read Tyler's message about losing the studio. She excused herself to the bathroom, where Vince knew she was probably calling her lover to console him. Dylan looked up from his homework at the kitchen table. "Mom seems upset." "She'll be fine," Vince replied, sipping his wine. Sometimes life just has a way of putting people exactly where they belong. His son studied him with intelligent eyes. "Dad, are you getting divorced?" The directness of the question caught Vince off guard, but not the wisdom behind it. Dylan had inherited his father's analytical mind. "Would that bother you?" "I don't know," Dylan answered honestly, "but I think Mom's been lying about something for a while now. And you've been different too." Colder. Vince set down his wine glass and truly looked at his son. At 16, Dylan was no longer a child to be protected with comfortable lies. He was becoming a man, and men faced hard truths. "Your mother is having an affair," Vince said simply. Dylan's face didn't change, but Vince saw his hands tighten into fists on the table. "I know. How long have you known?" "A couple months. I saw a text on her phone by accident." Dylan's voice was steady, but Vince could hear the pain underneath. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure justice is served," Vince replied. "The question is, what are you going to do?" Dylan looked toward the bathroom where Rebecca was still on her hushed phone call, then back at his father. "What do you need me to do?" In that moment, Vince saw himself reflected in his son's eyes. The same cold calculation, the same understanding that betrayal demanded a price. Some men might have felt proud. Vincent Crawford felt something far more dangerous: validation. Chapter 4. The Web Titans. 2 weeks after Tyler lost his studio, Vince implemented Phase 2 of his plan. He'd learned that Tyler's backup plan was to teach private classes in clients' homes while searching for a new location. Through a shell company, Vince began systematically contacting Tyler's client base, offering discounted yoga classes through a new instructor at a legitimate studio across town. Within days, Tyler's income stream dwindled to almost nothing. Desperate, he took a job delivering food for DoorDash to pay his bills, humiliating for someone who'd once commanded $50 an hour for private sessions. But Vince's cruelest cut came through social engineering. He created a fake dating profile using photos of an attractive woman named Jessica and began flirting with Tyler online. Desperate for both ego validation and money, Tyler quickly arranged to meet Jessica for drinks at Flanagan, Millbrook's most visible restaurant. On the appointed evening, Tyler sat alone at the bar for 3 hours, ordering increasingly expensive drinks while waiting for a woman who would never come. The bartender, coincidentally, was married to one of Rebecca's teaching colleagues. By the next morning, half the town knew that Rebecca's yoga instructor had been stood up by a mysterious woman he'd met online. The humiliation was perfect. Tyler's reputation as a local Lothario crumbled overnight, replaced by whispers about the desperate man ordering drink after drink while obsessively checking his phone. Rebecca tried to comfort Tyler, but their relationship began showing strain. Their secret meetings became arguments about his mounting problems, his lack of money, his inability to find a new studio. The passionate affair was becoming a burden. Vince observed it all with the satisfaction of a master craftsman watching his creation take shape. He varied his routine just enough to avoid suspicion while maintaining surveillance. Some evenings he worked late at construction sites. Others he claimed client dinners or supplier meetings. Rebecca never questioned his schedule. She was too preoccupied with her own deceptions. Dylan proved to be an invaluable ally. At 16, he was practically invisible to adults, able to observe and report without raising suspicion. He confirmed Tyler's evening work schedule, Rebecca's new habit of crying in her car after school, and most importantly, their increasingly frequent arguments when they thought no one was listening. She told him she was thinking about calling off the divorce. Dylan reported one evening while helping Vince organize blueprints in his home office. He got angry, said she was leading him on. And what did she say? That she never promised him anything, that this was all moving too fast. Dylan's voice carried no emotion, but Vince could see the anger simmering underneath. He called her a tease. Vince looked up from his papers. How did that make you feel? Like I wanted to break his face, Dylan admitted. But then I remembered what you said about patience. What did I say? That the best revenge is the kind that destroys everything they care about, not just what they can see. Pride swelled in Vince's chest. His son was learning the most important lesson of all, that true power came not from emotional outbursts, but from strategic thinking. That night, Vince lay in bed beside his wife, listening to her shallow breathing and planning his next move. Rebecca stirred, reaching for him in her sleep, and Vince felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even disgust. She had become an obstacle to be removed, nothing more. His phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator. Found something interesting about Hoffman's background. Call me. Vince smiled in the darkness. Phase 3 was about to begin. Chapter 5, Deeper Cuts. The information from his private investigator was better than Vince had hoped. Tyler Hoffman wasn't just a yoga instructor who preyed on married women. He was Tyler Hoffman, who'd been arrested for assault 3 years ago in Denver before moving to Millbrook. The charges had been dropped when the victim declined to press charges, but the arrest record remained. More intriguingly, the victim had been a married woman whose husband had discovered their affair. Tyler had apparently confronted the husband in a parking lot, resulting in a fight that left the husband with a broken nose and Tyler in handcuffs. Vince studied the police report with the interest of a scholar examining ancient texts. Tyler Hoffman had a history of violence when cornered, a useful piece of information for the right situation. But the truly valuable discovery was Tyler's pattern of behavior. In Denver, he targeted 3 different married women over 2 years, always promising them new lives while systematically isolating them from their support systems. He was a predator who'd refined his methods, and Rebecca was simply his latest mark. Armed with this knowledge, Vince crafted his most insidious attack yet. He arranged for copies of Tyler's arrest record to anonymously find their way to the remaining yoga studios in town, effectively blacklisting him from employment. He also sent copies to several of Tyler's former clients, along with a carefully worded note expressing concern for their safety. The reaction was swift and merciless. Tyler's reputation, already damaged by the failed date at Flanagan, collapsed entirely. Parents pulled their children from his classes, women canceled private sessions, and the organic juice bar fired him within days. Rebecca arrived home from school that Friday looking haggard and defeated. She'd been crying. Her makeup couldn't completely hide the evidence. Tyler's thinking about leaving town, she announced over dinner, her voice carefully controlled. Dylan looked up from his meatloaf. Where would he go? He's got some friends in Portland. Says there's nothing left for him here. Vince chewed thoughtfully. That's probably for the best. Sometimes a fresh start is exactly what a person needs. Rebecca's eyes flashed with something between grief and anger. You don't understand. He's a good person who's just had some bad luck. Bad luck, Vince repeated slowly, or bad choices? The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Dylan continued eating, but Vince could see his son's awareness of the undercurrents in the conversation. Sometimes good people make mistakes, Rebecca said defensively. And sometimes, Vince replied, people's true natures eventually surface, no matter how well they hide them. That night, Rebecca received a call that sent her into hysterics. Tyler had been arrested for drunk driving after rear-ending a family of 4 at a traffic light. No one was seriously injured, but Tyler's blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit, and there were drug paraphernalia in his car. What Rebecca didn't know was that Vince had orchestrated the entire incident. A few drinks bought for a desperate man at the right bar, a carefully timed call reporting an erratic driver, and Tyler's self-destructive tendencies did the rest. I have to help him, Rebecca declared, grabbing her purse. He needs bail money. No, Vince said simply. Rebecca froze at the door. What? I said no. You're not going anywhere. You can't tell me what to do, Vince. He's my friend. He's your lover. Vince corrected, his voice deadly calm. And you're my wife. And you're not going anywhere. The mask was finally slipping, and Rebecca could see the cold fury in her husband's eyes. Dylan watched from the kitchen doorway, silent and alert. Vince, sit down, Rebecca. We need to talk. Chapter 6, Declarations of War. Rebecca sat across from Vince in their living room, the same space where they'd planned Dylan's birthday parties and discussed mortgage refinancing. Now it felt like a courtroom, with Vince as both judge and executioner. I know about Tyler, Vince said without preamble. I've known for months. Rebecca's face went white. Vince, I can explain. No explanations. I want you to understand something very clearly. Your affair is over. Your boyfriend is going to prison for DUI and drug possession, and you're going to file for divorce. What? Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. You heard me. You're going to file for divorce, and you're going to cite irreconcilable differences. You're going to ask for minimal custody of Dylan, and you're going to accept whatever settlement I offer. Rebecca found her voice. You're insane if you think I'll just roll over and... Tyler Hoffman has a history of violence. Vince interrupted, sliding a folder across the coffee table. Arrest records, restraining orders, 3 different women in Denver who will testify that he's unstable and dangerous. Do you really want Dylan exposed to that kind of influence? Rebecca opened the folder with trembling hands, her face growing paler as she read. You orchestrated all of this, she breathed. The studio, his clients leaving, the arrest, all of it. I protected my family, Vince corrected, from a predator who was using you to destroy our son's stability. Our son. Rebecca's voice turned sharp. Dylan barely speaks to me anymore. He looks at me like I'm a stranger. Because you are, Dylan said from the doorway. Both parents turned to see their 16-year-old son standing with his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold judgment. You're not the mother I thought I knew. Dylan, honey, you don't understand. I understand that you were screwing some loser while Dad worked his ass off to give us everything. I understand that you lied to my face every day for months. And I understand that you were planning to leave us for some guy who called me your kid like I was just baggage he'd have to deal with. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She hadn't known Dylan was aware of Tyler's casual dismissal. So here's what's going to happen. Vince continued, his voice businesslike. You're going to move out of this house by the end of the week. You're going to stay at your sister's in Cleveland until the divorce is finalized. You're going to accept supervised visitation with Dylan, if he wants it, and you're going to rebuild your pathetic life somewhere far away from here. And if I don't, Vince smiled, and Rebecca had never seen anything so cold in her life. Then I released Tyler's arrest record to the school board along with evidence of your affair. I provide testimony about your neglect of Dylan, your deception, your complete abandonment of your responsibilities as a mother and teacher. I destroy your career, your reputation, and any chance you have of seeing your son until he's 18. You can't. I could do anything I want, Rebecca. I have money, connections, and absolutely nothing left to lose. You made sure of that when you chose to betray everything we built together. Dylan stepped into the room. Mom, just take the deal. Please. Rebecca looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. The boy who'd once crawled into her bed during thunderstorms was gone, replaced by a young man who watched her with his father's calculated coldness. When did I lose you? She whispered. When you decided Tyler was more important than your family. Dylan replied, without hesitation. That night, Rebecca packed her bags while Vince and Dylan sat in the kitchen playing chess. It was a surreal domesticity, father and son calmly planning their next moves while the woman who'd born and raised one of them gathered her belongings upstairs. She's going to try to fight this, Dylan said, moving his queen. She'll try, Vince agreed, studying the board. But she doesn't have the resources or the resolve for a prolonged battle. Check. Dylan smiled grimly and moved his king. What about Tyler? Tyler's going to be in jail for at least 6 months, longer if I can arrange for additional charges. By the time he gets out, Rebecca will realize that their great love affair was built on lies and fantasies. And then, Vince captured Dylan's rook with his bishop. Then they'll both learn what it really means to lose everything. Checkmate. As if summoned by their conversation, Rebecca appeared in the kitchen doorway with 2 suitcases. She looked at her husband and son playing chess as if they hadn't just destroyed her life, and something broke inside her. I loved you, she said to Vince. For 15 years, I loved you. Vince didn't look up from the chessboard. No, Rebecca, you love what I provided. There's a difference. She turned to Dylan, desperation in her eyes. And I love you, Dylan. No matter what happens, remember that I love you. Dylan finally looked at her, and Rebecca saw no forgiveness in his face. Love doesn't lie, Mom. Whatever you felt for us wasn't strong enough to keep you from betraying us. Rebecca Crawford walked out of her family's life that night, and neither her husband nor her son moved from the chessboard until her car disappeared down the street. Chapter 7. The Courtroom. 6 months later, Vincent Crawford stood in family court wearing his best suit and carrying his son's phone like a loaded weapon. The divorce proceedings had been brutal and public, exactly as Vince had intended. Rebecca's attempts to claim half their assets had been systematically demolished by evidence of her abandonment, adultery, and what Vince's lawyer had masterfully presented as willful destruction of the family unit. Tyler Hoffman had served 4 months in county jail and emerged to find his life in ruins. Rebecca had waited for him, moved to Cleveland to be closer to her sister, and tried to rebuild their relationship. But poverty, legal troubles, and the reality of their situation had poisoned whatever passion they'd once shared. Their great love affair had devolved into bitter arguments about money, blame, and the wreckage of their previous lives. Now, facing the final custody hearing, Rebecca had made one last desperate play. She'd hired a lawyer who specialized in parental alienation cases, claiming that Vince had systematically turned Dylan against her through manipulation and psychological abuse. Your Honor, Rebecca's lawyer argued, my client's son has been systematically programmed to reject his mother by a father who cannot forgive his wife's human failings. This is a classic case of parental alienation syndrome. Dylan, now 17 and built like a linebacker, sat in the witness chair with the same cold composure his father had taught him. He answered every question with measured precision, never raising his voice, never showing emotion. Mr. Crawford, the judge asked, how would you describe your relationship with your mother over the past year? Non-existent, Your Honor. She sends cards and tries to call, but I have no interest in maintaining contact with someone who abandoned our family for her own selfish desires. Don't you think you're being a bit harsh? Rebecca's lawyer pressed. People make mistakes. Shouldn't there be room for forgiveness? Dylan's response was swift and cutting. Forgiveness is for accidents and momentary lapses in judgment. My mother conducted a months-long affair, lied to my face daily, and was prepared to dismantle our family for a man who saw me as an inconvenience. That's not a mistake. That's a character defect. Vince felt a surge of pride. His son had learned the lesson perfectly. But Rebecca's lawyer wasn't finished. "Mr. Crawford, isn't it true that your father has influenced your opinion through constant negative commentary about your mother?" "No," Dylan replied. "My father has never said anything about my mother that wasn't factually accurate. She had an affair. She lied. She chose her lover over her family. These aren't opinions, they're facts." The lawyer turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this child has clearly been poisoned against his mother by—" "He's been unhinged, violent," Rebecca suddenly interrupted, her voice cracking as she pointed at Dylan. "I'm afraid of him. Afraid of what he's become under his father's influence." The courtroom fell silent. Dylan's face remained impassive, but Vince could see the hurt flash in his son's eyes before being quickly suppressed. The judge turned to Vince. "Any questions?" Vince stood slowly, holding Dylan's phone. The device contained 6 months of Rebecca's increasingly desperate voicemails and text messages, including several where she'd called Dylan just like his father and threatened to make him pay for choosing Vince over her. But the recording Vince planned to play was far more damaging. Rebecca, in her desperation to maintain contact with Dylan, had left a 20-minute voicemail the previous week after Dylan refused to meet her for coffee. In it, she'd revealed her true feelings about the situation, about Dylan, and about the kind of mother she'd really been. "Just one," Vince replied, his voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "Shall I play the recording you secretly made of your mother?" Dylan burst into tears, the first emotion he'd shown all day. The court reporter's pen froze as Rebecca's voice began to play from the phone speaker. "Dylan, I know you think you hate me, but you need to understand something. I never wanted to be a mother. I was 22 when you were born, and I gave up everything for you and your father. Do you know what that's like? To watch your dreams disappear because you're trapped by responsibilities you never asked for." The voice continued, slurred slightly by wine, becoming more bitter with each sentence. "Your father thinks he's so perfect, but he's cold, Dylan. He's turned you into the same kind of emotionless robot he is. At least Tyler made me feel alive, made me feel like a woman instead of just a wife and mother." Rebecca stood up abruptly. "Stop it. Please stop." But the recording continued. "Maybe it's better this way. Maybe you're better off with just your father. At least then I can finally live my own life without pretending to be someone I'm not." The silence in the courtroom was deafening when the recording ended. Dylan wiped his eyes and looked directly at his mother. "That's who you really are," he said quietly. "And that's why I choose my father." Chapter 8. Final Judgments. The judge's ruling was swift and merciless. Rebecca Crawford lost all custody rights to her son, was ordered to pay child support despite her limited income, and was granted supervised visitation only if Dylan requested it, which everyone in the courtroom knew would never happen. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca approached Vince and Dylan one last time. Tyler waited by a dented Honda Civic, looking as defeated as a man could while still breathing. "Vince, please," Rebecca begged. "He's still my son." "No," Vince replied without emotion. "He's my son. You gave up that right when you chose Tyler over your family." Rebecca turned to Dylan, tears streaming down her face. "Dylan, I know I said terrible things, but I was drunk and angry. You have to believe that I love you." Dylan looked at the woman who'd given birth to him, and Vince saw the exact moment when the last thread of connection severed forever. "I believe you love the idea of me," Dylan said, "but you don't love me enough to put me first. You never did." "That's not true." "It is true, and it's okay, Mom, because I learned something important from watching you destroy our family." "What?" "I learned what kind of person I never want to become." Dylan walked away, leaving Rebecca standing alone on the courthouse steps. Vince lingered for a moment, studying his ex-wife's tear-streaked face. "This isn't over," she whispered. "Someday Dylan will see what you really are." "What am I, Rebecca?" "A monster who destroyed his own family out of pride." Vince smiled the same cold smile that had terrified her that night in their living room. "No, Rebecca. I'm a man who protected his son from a mother who saw him as an obligation and a father figure who saw him as an inconvenience. I'm a man who refused to let my family be collateral damage in your selfish fantasy." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "And I'm a man who always collects what he's owed. This was just the interest payment. Vince walked away, leaving Rebecca to contemplate the wreckage of her choices. Tyler approached hesitantly, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. "Don't touch me," she snapped. "This is all your fault." "My fault? You're the one who... Who what? Who believed your lies about loving me? Who thought you actually wanted a life with me and my son?" Tyler's face hardened. "I never promised you anything. You assumed. I assumed you were a man instead of a coward who runs when things get difficult." Their argument escalated quickly, drawn-out frustrations and mutual blame poisoning whatever remained of their relationship. Other people exiting the courthouse stopped to stare as Rebecca and Tyler aired their grievances publicly, their great love affair ending not with passion, but with recriminations and accusations. Vince and Dylan drove home in comfortable silence. The house felt different now, cleaner, somehow, with Rebecca's presence finally erased completely. Dylan had claimed his parents' master bedroom, saying it felt weird to have it sitting empty, and Vince had converted Rebecca's former office into a workshop for his architectural plans. "Dad," Dylan said as they pulled into their driveway, "do you think I'm too hard on people?" Vince considered the question seriously. "Do you think you are?" "Sometimes. Like maybe normal people would have forgiven Mom by now." "Forgiveness is a luxury for people who don't understand consequences," Vince replied. "Your mother made her choice, and she has to live with the results. That's not cruelty, that's justice. And if I'm wrong, if someday I regret cutting her out completely," Vince turned off the engine and looked at his son, "then you'll live with that choice too." "But Dylan, understand this. The moment you start making exceptions for people who betray you, you signal to the world that your boundaries mean nothing. People will take everything you allow them to take." Dylan nodded slowly. "Is that why you never try to work things out with her? Because it would have made you look weak?" "I never try to work things out with her because she chose another man over her family. There's no coming back from that. Ever." Chapter 9. New Foundations. 2 years later, Vincent Crawford stood in the kitchen of his home, preparing breakfast for Dylan before his son left for his freshman year at the state university. At 19, Dylan had inherited his father's height and his mother's eyes, but his character was purely his own, forged in the crucible of betrayal and hardened by the lessons of justice. The house was quiet except for the sizzle of bacon in the pan. Vince had never remarried, had barely dated. Some of his friends worried he was becoming a hermit, but Vince felt no loneliness. He had his work, his son, and the satisfaction of a life rebuilt on his own terms. "Dad, there's an article about Mom in the Cleveland paper." Dylan called from the dining room, where he was reading on his laptop. "What kind of article?" "She's getting married. To some accountant named Gary." Vince felt nothing at the news. "Good for her." Dylan appeared in the kitchen doorway. "The article mentions that she's a devoted stepmother to Gary's 2 kids. Weird, right? Since she was such a terrible mother to me." "People reinvent themselves when they need to," Vince replied, plating the bacon. "Maybe she'll be better at being a stepmother than she was at being your mother." "Do you believe that?" Vince handed Dylan his plate. "I don't care enough to have an opinion about it." They ate breakfast in companionable silence, 2 men who'd learned to find peace in each other's company. Dylan would leave for college in 3 hours, and the house would be empty for the first time in Vince's adult life. "You gonna be okay here by yourself?" Dylan asked. "I raised you to be independent," Vince replied. "Time I practiced what I preached. And if Mom tries to contact me at school, that's your decision to make. You're an adult now." Dylan nodded, understanding the weight of that responsibility. "What about Tyler? Ever wonder what happened to him?" Vince had known, of course. His network of contacts in the construction industry extended throughout the region, and information flowed naturally to him. Tyler had drifted from town to town, unable to hold steady employment, his reputation preceding him thanks to carefully placed words in the right ears. He was currently living in a studio apartment in Akron, delivering groceries for minimum wage and struggling with alcohol dependency. "I assume he's living with the consequences of his choices," Vince said simply. After Dylan left for college, Vince walked through the empty house, noting what needed to be updated or repaired. The silence was profound but not oppressive. He'd built this life deliberately, removing every element that didn't serve his purposes, and what remained was solid, reliable, and completely under his control. His phone rang around noon. The caller ID showed Rebecca's new number. She tried calling several times over the past 2 years, always blocked by Vince and ignored by Dylan. For the first time in 24 months, Vince answered. "Hello, Rebecca." "Vince." Her voice was older, wearier. "I heard Dylan started college." "He did. I wanted to. I was hoping to maybe send him a card or—" "Don't. Vince, please. He's my son, too. He was your son. You gave up that relationship when you chose Tyler over your family. Nothing has changed. Everything's changed. I'm married now. I have a new family. I've learned." "You've learned nothing," Vince interrupted. "You've simply found new people to disappoint. That's not fair." "Fair." Vince's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "You abandoned your son for a convicted felon with a history of violence. You called Dylan violent and unstable in open court. You left him a voicemail saying you never wanted to be a mother. And now you want me to believe you've changed. People can change, Vince. People can grow." "Some people can. You're not one of them. You're a selfish woman who makes selfish choices and then expects the world to forgive you when those choices have consequences." The line was quiet for a long moment. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "What do I have to do to earn forgiveness? What would it take?" Vince looked out the window at his front yard, where he'd taught Dylan to throw a football, where they'd built snowmen and raked leaves and lived their lives without her. "Nothing you could ever do would be enough," he said finally. "Because forgiveness requires remorse, and remorse requires accepting responsibility for the harm you caused. You're calling me because you feel guilty, not because you understand what you destroyed." "I understand. You understand nothing. You destroyed a 16-year-old boy's faith in unconditional love. You taught him that the person who was supposed to protect him would abandon him for her own gratification. You turned his mother into a stranger who saw him as an obstacle to her happiness." Rebecca was crying now. "I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" Vince's voice turned deadly quiet. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. What you did was a calculated betrayal of everyone who trusted you. And the fact that you still can't see the difference is exactly why you'll never be part of his life again." "Vince, please." "Goodbye, Rebecca. Don't call again." Vince hung up and blocked her number permanently. He stood in his empty kitchen, surrounded by the life he'd built from the ashes of her betrayal, and felt nothing but satisfaction. Outside, construction crews were working on a new subdivision he was developing. His business had thrived in the years since the divorce, perhaps because he'd learned to value loyalty and competence above all other virtues. His employees knew that Vincent Crawford rewarded excellence and destroyed those who betrayed his trust. Dylan called that evening from his dorm room, excited about his classes and new friends. He mentioned meeting a girl named Ashley who was studying to be a teacher, and Vince smiled at the irony. "Just remember what I taught you about trust," Vince said. "I remember everything you taught me, Dad, including the most important lesson, which is that people show you who they really are through their actions, not their words. And once they show you, believe them." After they hung up, Vince poured himself a glass of wine and sat on his back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. He thought about Rebecca, probably crying to her new husband about her cruel ex-husband who wouldn't let her see their son. He thought about Tyler, drinking away his failures in some dingy apartment. He thought about Dylan, building his own life on the foundation of principles Vince had taught him. Vincent Crawford had lost a wife and gained something far more valuable. A son who understood that betrayal had consequences, that loyalty had value, and that some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. The sun disappeared behind the trees, and Vince finished his wine in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the perfect silence of a life lived exactly as he'd chosen to live it. Some men forgave. Some men forgot. Some men moved on. Vincent Crawford was not one of those. And there you have it. And he was perfectly fine with that. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.